The silence in the secret Iranian command center at Bandar Abbas was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of a mistake that could end a regime in a single night. Outside, the humid air of the Persian Gulf hung still, but inside the bunker, the atmosphere was electric with sudden, paralyzing terror. On the glowing tactical displays, a single red icon flickered, marking the impact of two Ghadir-class anti-ship missiles. Commander Rezai had spent months planning this. The order from the hardliners in Tehran was clear: deliver a stinging blow to the Americans without triggering a full-scale war. Hit a logistical ship, damage a supply vessel, show the world that the Strait of Hormuz belongs to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. At exactly 3:24 in the morning, Rezai had given the order. He watched the twin streaks of fire launch from the hidden coastal batteries, believing he was aiming at a vulnerable, slow-moving auxiliary ship trailing behind the main carrier strike group. But as the smoke cleared from the launch tubes, the reality on the radar screens began to shift into something monstrous. The target had not slowed down. It had not sunk. Instead, the electronic signature of the vessel began to expand, blooming across the monitors like a predatory shadow. The soft target Rezai thought he had struck was actually the USS Constellation, the lead ship of the Navy's newest class of frigates, packed to the teeth with the most advanced interceptors and electronic warfare suites on the planet. One missile had been shredded by a CRAM interceptor before it even got close. The second had grazed the reinforced hull, causing minor cosmetic damage, but doing something far more dangerous. It had woken the dragon. In the command center, the air grew cold. Rezai felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the silhouette on his screen was not a helpless tanker. He had not poked the American Tiger. He had driven a knife into its shoulder. And now, the Tiger was turning around. The radio on the commander's desk erupted. It wasn't a cry for help or a frantic distress signal from a sinking ship. It was a broadcast on the open hailing frequency, delivered in a voice so calm it sounded like ice scraping against a tombstone. This is the United States Navy. You have just committed an act of unprovoked aggression against a sovereign warship in international waters. We are no longer tracking your position. We are now targeting your extinction. Rezai looked at his subordinates. Their hands were shaking. They knew that in the next 60 seconds, the rules of the Middle East had changed forever. To understand the magnitude of the mistake made at 3:24 that morning, one must understand the evolution of American naval power in 2026. For decades, the Iranians had played a dangerous game of mosquito tactics, using swarms of small boats and low-cost drones to harass massive, lumbering American cruisers. But the USS Constellation was not a relic of the Cold War. It was a ghost. Designed as the first of a new breed of multi-mission frigates, the Constellation was built with a sleek, low-observable hull that made it appear on primitive Iranian radar as nothing more than a small fishing dhow or a drifting freighter. This was the tactical trap the IRGC had walked into. They thought they were targeting a soft, auxiliary supply vessel because the ship's radar cross-section was intentionally masked. They saw a weak link in the American chain, never realizing that the link was made of reinforced titanium and rage. Deep within the ship's hull sat the Aegis Baseline 10 combat system, a digital brain capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously across the entire Persian Gulf. While Commander Rezai's men were celebrating what they thought was a successful hit, the Constellation's SPY-6 radar was already painting every single Iranian missile battery along the coast of the Hormozgan province. The Americans had spent over $20 billion to ensure that their ships could see everything while remaining nearly invisible. The Constellation carried 32 Mark 41 vertical launch cells, each one packed with a variety of lethal responses, from the Tomahawk land attack missile to the new hypersonic RIM-1 74 extended range active missiles. These weapons don't just hit targets, They erased them from existence with surgical precision. In the Pentagon, this ship was known as the Hormuz Guardian. For the Iranians, it was about to become an executioner. The last time the United States had engaged the Iranian Navy in these waters was 1988 during Operation Praying Mantis. Back then, the Americans had crippled the Iranian fleet in a single afternoon using gravity bombs and old-school naval guns. But that was nearly 40 years ago. In 2026, the technology was faster, the sensors were smarter, and the patience of the American 7th Fleet had finally reached its absolute limit. As the red alert sirens wailed across the Iranian coast, the sailors on the Constellation were not panicking. There was no shouting, no chaotic running on the decks. There was only the low hum of cooling fans in the Combat Information Center and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. They were professionals at work. They had been trained for this exact scenario for 5 years in high-fidelity simulators. They knew that the graze on their hull was not a wound. It was a signed death warrant for every IRGC asset within 200 miles. The Iranian commanders believed they were playing a game of chess. They didn't realize that the Americans had already flipped the board and were now reaching for the throat. Inside the subterranean command bunker at Bandar Abbas, the air had turned toxic with the stench of recycled oxygen and the sharp, metallic tang of cold sweat. General Abbas Khani, the regional commander of the Revolutionary Guard's naval forces, slammed his fist onto the mahogany tactical table, sending a glass of untouched tea shattering to the floor. "Explain the telemetry," Khani bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and burgeoning panic. "You reported a successful strike on a logistical vessel. Why is that icon still moving at 30 knots? Commander Rezai, his face a ghostly shade of gray, could barely find his voice. He pointed a trembling finger at the main screen. The red dot representing their target was no longer drifting. It was turning, a sharp, aggressive arc that defied the physics of a heavy supply ship. "Sir," a young technician whispered, his eyes glued to a waterfall of scrolling green code. "The radar signature just shifted. It was a deception. They were using electronic masking. It is not the oiler. It is the Juliet Foxtrot Golf 62, the Constellation. It is the lead ship of the new American frigate class." The room went deathly silent. Every officer in that bunker knew the name. The Constellation was not just a ship. It was a floating nightmare designed specifically to dominate the littoral waters of the Persian Gulf. It was the apex predator of the strait. "We were told the Americans would be cautious," Rezai stammered, looking for a way to deflect the inevitable blame. "The intelligence said they would avoid escalation after the elections. We thought a small hit on a tanker would humiliate them without—" "You fool!" Khani hissed, grabbing Rezai by the front of his uniform and pulling him close enough to smell the fear on his breath. "You didn't hit a tanker. You hit the crown jewel of the 7th Fleet. Tehran wanted a diplomatic lever, and you have handed Washington a blank check for a massacre. Do you understand what happens now? The Americans do not negotiate when their warships are touched. They erase." On the tactical map, more blue icons began to appear. 4, 8, 12. The American Carrier Strike Group, which had been loitering 50 miles out in the Arabian Sea, was suddenly waking up. The radar detected the launch of 6 F-35 Lightning II fighters from the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. They weren't just patrolling, they were coming at supersonic speeds, screaming toward the Iranian coastline. "General!" the technician shouted, his voice rising in pitch. "The Constellation has activated its fire control radar. We are being painted. Every battery from Jask to Kish Island is being targeted. They are locking onto our position right now." Khani felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He looked at the heavy steel doors of the bunker, suddenly realizing they were nothing more than a tomb. He knew that the Americans had spent decades mapping every square inch of these mountains. They knew the depth of the concrete. They knew the frequency of the power generators. "Shut down the transmitters," Connie ordered, but it was too late. Tell the coastal batteries to stand down. Tell them to lower their launchers. We must show them it was a mistake. Sir, Razai said, staring at the screen in horror, the Americans aren't waiting for an explanation. They've already launched. The display showed 16 small, white streaks erupting from the blue icon of the constellation. They weren't heading for the sea, they were heading for the shore. The wrong ship was no longer a victim. It was a judge, jury, and executioner, and the sentence was being delivered at Mach 3. Captain Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the USS Constellation with a cup of black coffee in his left hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the faint glow of the Iranian coastline met the dark water. To anyone else, the impact of a missile against a warship would be a cause for frantic shouting and adrenaline-fueled chaos. To Thorne, it was a tactical problem with a very specific, very violent solution. He didn't look like a man who had just been attacked. He looked like a man who had just found a reason to do what he was trained for. "Status on the hull," Thorne said, his voice a low, steady baritone that instantly calmed the younger sailors on the bridge. "Cosmetic only, Captain," the tactical action officer replied, his fingers flying across the glass interface of the Aegis console. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite successfully diverted the primary seeker head. They caught a glancing blow on the starboard quarter. "No casualties, no fires, all systems are green." Thorne nodded once. "Excellent. Let's speak to our friends in Bandar Abbas." He stepped toward the communications station and keyed the bridge-to-bridge radio. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't offer a warning. He simply began to speak, knowing that every ear in the Iranian Naval Command was pressed against their headsets, terrified of what was coming next. "This is the United States Navy," Thorne began, his words cutting through the static like a scalpel. "To the commander of the battery that just fired, you are currently operating under a delusion. You believe you have struck a blow against a superior force. In reality, you have merely revealed your position. We have mapped your launch site, your secondary command bunker, and the fuel trucks currently idling 300 yards to your north. You have exactly 60 seconds to broadcast an unconditional surrender on this frequency, or I will authorize the systematic removal of your entire coastal defense grid." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end. Then the voice of General Connie crackled through, sounding desperate and strained. This was a navigational error, a technical malfunction. We were targeting a rogue vessel." Thorne leaned closer to the microphone, a cold, predatory smile touching his lips. "General, do not insult my intelligence or your own life. You didn't hit a rogue vessel. You hit the wrong ship. You hit a platform that is currently tracking every heartbeat in your bunker. My computers have already calculated the flight path for 16 Tomahawk missiles. They are slated to arrive in 4 minutes. If you want to see the sun rise over the Gulf, you will order your men to step away from their consoles and walk out into the open air with their hands above their heads." "You would not dare!" Connie screamed, though the bravado was paper-thin. "This would be an act of total war." "General," Thorne whispered, "look at your radar. Or rather, look at where your radar used to be." At that exact moment, the Constellation's high-powered electronic attack system surged. On the Iranian screens, everything vanished into a wall of white noise. The American ship hadn't just jammed them, it had digitally blinded them. They were standing in a room with a hungry lion, and someone had just turned out the lights. 30 seconds, General, Thorne said, checking his watch. "Make your choice. History is watching, but it won't remember your name if you're turned into glass and ash." On the bridge of the Constellation, the silence was absolute. The crew watched the countdown on the main screen. 10, 9, 8. Thorne didn't blink. He wasn't a politician. He was the commander of a $5 billion instrument of national will. And the will of the United States was currently focused on a single point of fire on a distant shore. The countdown on the main tactical screen of the USS Constellation reached zero with a cold, digital finality. Captain Thorne did not give the order to glass the entire coastline. Instead, he authorized a Level 2 surgical suppression. Across the deck of the frigate, 4 vertical launch cells hissed open, and 4 missiles roared into the night sky, their tails of orange fire reflecting off the dark waves of the Strait of Hormuz. They didn't hit the bunker. They didn't hit the barracks. With the terrifying precision of 2026 technology, the missiles struck the 4 primary radar arrays and the central communication mast of the Bandar Abbas facility simultaneously. In 1 second, the Iranian command center was deaf, dumb, and blind. The high-explosive warheads didn't just destroy the equipment. They sent a physical shock wave through the underground bunker that knocked General Khani and his staff to the floor. The message was louder than any explosion. We can touch you whenever we want, and there is nothing you can do to stop us. By dawn, the Strait of Hormuz was eerily quiet. The Iranian fast attack boats had retreated to their pens, their crews ordered to stand down by a terrified central command in Tehran. The "wrong ship" incident had not started World War III, but it had ended the era of Iranian harassment in the Gulf. The world had watched in real time as a single American frigate dismantled a regional power's coastal defense in less than 10 minutes without losing a single sailor. The geopolitical fallout was immediate. In the halls of the United Nations and the situation rooms of rival powers, the lesson of the Constellation was studied with frantic intensity. The Americans had proven that their new fleet was not just about defense, it was about absolute surgical dominance. The incident at 3:24 in the morning became a textbook example of how a single miscalculation by an aggressor can lead to a total strategic collapse. Captain Thorne stood on the wing of the bridge as the sun began to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. The grays on the hull would be repaired in a few days, but the psychological scar left on the IRGC would last for decades. The United States Navy had reminded the world that while they may be quiet, they are never weak. And in the dangerous waters of 2026, hitting the wrong ship is the last mistake any commander will ever make. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this high-stakes encounter. If you found this breakdown of naval strategy and modern conflict insightful, we would sincerely appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support is the foundation that allows our team to continue producing these deep dives into the world's most critical flashpoints. We would love to hear your thoughts on this situation in the comments section below. Do you believe the American response was measured, or did it set a dangerous precedent for the future of the Gulf? If you find it difficult to put your thoughts into words, or simply have nothing to add at the moment, even a simple "thank you" in the comments would mean a great deal to our team. Thank you for your time and for being part of our community.